speech he gave just before the 2021 US Capitol riots, which has caused the resignation of two senior leaders at the BBC and an apology. Let's bring in now John Quinn, who's an American lawyer and executive chairman and founding partner of Global Disputes law firm. He was listed as one of America's most influential lawyers by the National Law Society. He joins us from LA, where he's currently a passenger in a car. Thank you very much for being with us. So if President Trump were to follow through with this lawsuit, how would it work? What's your understanding of where it would be brought?
Well, he'd have a number of choices where he could bring the suit. He could bring it in any state in the U.S. where people might have had access to or might have heard the program. There are some significant differences between defamation law in the UK and in the US. In the UK, a plaintiff needs to only prove that the statement is defamatory. That is to say that it was damaging and harmful to one's reputation. They don't have to prove that the statement was false. In the UK, the defendant has to prove that the statement was true in order to put on its defense, or that the statement was not defamatory. That's not true in the U.S. There's a higher burden in the U.S. in that the plaintiff has to prove not only that the statement was defamatory, but that it was false. And there's a second legal principle that comes into play in the case of a plaintiff like President Trump, and that is if a plaintiff is a so-called public figure, then the plaintiff must prove that the defendant acted with malice. The theory being that there should be a broader scope to make comments about public figures. And it's hard to imagine someone who's a more public figure than President Trump. So he would have to prove that the BBC acted with actual malice. Now, in this case, he might be able to put on such a case. There was, from what I've seen about the editing of the documentary, I mean, it was at a minimum reckless, arguably intentional. It did give a misimpression. And, if this came out back in 1920 or 1921, the BBC might be able to say we didn't know so much about what his involvement is. But now, in 1925, when the program came out, a lot more is known about the extent of his involvement. And the impression that this creates seems to be inconsistent with what we know now. So, on the basis of what's known now, it might be easier for the president to make a case of malice in this case. So
yeah, I mean, over the editing, the chair of the BBC, Samir Shah, has apologised for what he's called an error of judgment. Given that there's been that apology and senior resignations at the BBC, do you still expect this to go ahead in the end, this case, or do you think it'll be the threat of a case?
Well, who knows whether the president will actually bring a case or not. I mean, if a case is brought and it ultimately goes to trial and it goes to a jury, the fact that, there was an apology or that people lost their jobs as a result of it really wouldn't be relevant to whether this was defamation. It might be relevant to the amount of damages. It might be relevant specifically to the amount of punitive damages. In an intentional tort like a defamation case, a jury can award punitive damages. That is, an amount of money necessary to correct to try to punish the defendant and make sure that they don't engage in similar conduct in the future. The fact that an apology was made and that people lost their jobs might suggest that that type of punitive corrective award might not be necessary, or might suggest a lower amount would be appropriate.
John.
But it really wouldn't have anything to do with whether the story was defamatory.
John Quinn, thank you very much indeed for your